I'd like to start this session on modular single-page applications with ASP.NET Core, Webpack, and Aurelia. And I want to thank you first of all for coming out here today to the session. I honestly wasn't expecting this many people here, so thank you for that. Who am I? I'm Jonathan. I'm an IT architect at InfoSupport here in the Netherlands. I have over 11 years of experience developing enterprise applications for various customers of InfoSupport. I love .NET Core. I've been playing with the betas and all the versions since then, so I guess you could say I'm a .NET Core enthusiast. But I'm also very keen on continuous delivery. It's one of the things I'm known for inside InfoSupport. So, and currently I'm working at R&R Workforce Management, which is a customer of ours, and I'll tell a little bit more about that company and what we do to give a bit of context as to what I'm talking about today. Oh, sorry. So I'll start with that, a little bit of background on what we're doing and what we set out to do at the beginning of this year. We had a vision of what we wanted to achieve, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And one of the key things there is that we wanted to split our code base for a new UI we're building into separate modules, and I'll talk about how we set that up, how we got that working. And I'll also talk about how we manage loading of those modules at the end. And I'll have some closing slides for you with some links to get started. So what's R&R Workforce Management? It's a software as a service vendor. They are mostly targeting retail sector, so supermarkets in the Netherlands mostly. So our customers are Jumbo, which is a big supermarket here in the Netherlands, if you know them. Plus is a big customer of ours as well. And recently we expanded into Germany as well. So Edeka, which is a very large chain of supermarkets there. They have, I think, about 1,200 shops around Germany. So that's a lot of shops that are, well, they're not all working with our software right now, but we are getting there. And what's a bit different for InfoSupport, I guess, is that this is a company we've acquired in 2010. So they are still, they're a separate company, and they are still a customer of InfoSupport, but we're under the same roof, basically. Oh. And what is this we do? We sell our software to supermarkets, and what is it we do? So we start with a process that's called forecasting, which is basically, you know, you look at the coming week and you say, well, I think I'm going to have so many customers in my shop. I think I'm going to have this many freight coming into the shop and stuff like that. And then we use something that's called norms, which is basically saying like, okay, it takes one guy in the shop to put a can of, I don't know, beans into the store, and then we know how long that takes, right? So that's what we use as input. And then based on a calculation that's pretty complex, I won't bore you with the details on that, but we get a number of hours we need to plan staff for the coming week. So we say like, okay, you have to plan, I don't know, 300 hours of people into your shop for this week, so you have enough people inside the store. And then we go to scheduling, which is a big piece of what we're doing. So people in the shop are planning their staff for the coming week, and we use HRM data, which is usually imported through all kinds of interfaces with our customers, and we use that as input for the coming week. And then we go to realization, where we use clock times from, you know, you have these clocks inside the store, and somebody swipes his badge there, and we know when they started, when they stopped, and etc. And we also import point of sale data, so we know how many products were sold in this week, etc. And then finally, we go to payment, which is just, you know, how much should these people have planned for this week be paid. And we export that data to a payroll provider, which we have several of these days. And so that's all interface work to external customers. This is just a little bit of overview of what it is we do at this company. And this is a little bit of an architecture diagram of what that looks like in practice. So what we see here is that we have these separate modules like forecasting and scheduling and payment and realization. That's all separated out. They are all their own service, basically, so we deploy them individually and we version them individually, and there are separate teams working on them, basically. And at the beginning of this year, we started a project that focuses on that upper part, which right now it's drawn as separate pieces, but really it's just one thing we deploy to production. It's just one big giant Silverlight application. If you know Silverlight, anybody? Yep, all right. Then you know that we want to move away from that. So that's one of the key things we're doing right now. And there's a lot of other stuff going around, which is more on the outside of the system, like all those interfaces with our external partners, etc. And I think about 3 years ago, we started on this journey towards continuous delivery. I guess you could say microservices. It's technically not correct, but I won't bore you with that. But that's where we're moving towards. So when it came time to rethink our front end, basically, we had a plan. So what did we set out to do? We wanted to move away from Silverlight, obviously. I think it's dead right now. If you don't agree, think again. It's dead, trust me. And so we had to move away from that. There's even customers telling us right now, we don't want to install Silverlight on our clients anymore, so then they are not going to be able to work with our product. So that's a big problem for us. We have to get away from that and move to a more modern stack. Another thing is that we wanted to focus on usability. The front end hasn't had major usability upgrades in the past couple of years, so when we decided it was time to rebuild the whole thing, we might as well take some time and do it right? So that's one of the key things I think that is currently on our minds as to how can we make this piece of software more usable for our users. And of course, currently we're a Silverlight application and Silverlight only runs in IE. We have some customers coming to our websites apparently which are not using IE, which is weird because it's not going to work. I don't know what they're doing, but anyway, we wanted to move away from that as well and support modern browsers like Chrome, Firefox, etc. So that's also something that we keep in mind. In fact, right now we're targeting Chrome, so we're basically saying, right now we're saying you have to use IE, and then after that we're saying don't use IE, use Chrome. So that's going to be interesting once we go live with this. We also wanted to move to a modern stack, right? So we're rebuilding the whole thing, and in the JavaScript world, everything's moving really fast. So if you start with an older platform, right, you're gonna be left behind at some point. So we wanted to have something that's modern, that's actual right now, so we can at least have some leadway before we have to move to something else again. And we did have some experience with AngularJS, which is Angular 1, really, and it was working well for us, but we knew that that's not going to happen. We're not going to do this new thing in AngularJS because it's pretty much that as well. We also wanted to reuse our existing backend APIs. We didn't want to, rebuild that as well. So we used our backend APIs. They're written in ASP.NET Web API, and we're using that. Sometimes we tweak minor things, we add new functionality. That functionality is going to production right now. That's already live, but you can't really use it because you don't have the new user interface on top of that. And finally, which is the most important thing, is that we wanted to have this independence of those modules, like what I saw in the architecture diagram at first. And we wanted to get that same split into our UI as well. So we can individually build them, individually deploy them to production, and keep them updated individually, basically. So that's what we set out to do at the start of this year. So basically we wanted to move from this to this. So we can, deploy our backend service with its own piece of the UI into production, and then have that continuously delivered to production. So we had to choose some technologies to do this with, and we ended up with Aurelia. Anyone here using Aurelia right now? Some hands. All right, cool. I guess I could spend an entire session on the merits of choosing one of the web frameworks over the others. Like there's so many things to choose from, and which one should you choose? We chose Aurelia. I'm not going to spend much time on why we chose that right now, but I'm more than happy to discuss that later on after the session. Now, we also wanted to do TypeScript because it's just a natural fit for us. We use C# on the back end. TypeScript really fits well with that, so that makes sense for us. And since we were doing TypeScript, we also needed to have something to, translate that TypeScript into JavaScript, and then so it can run in the browser, right? So then, quite naturally, you come to Webpack as a way to bundle everything and transpile your code, and then ship that as one big giant JavaScript thing to the client. Now, I also talked about ASP.NET Core JavaScript Services. Anyone here doing ASP.NET Core? Quite a few people. Anyone use JavaScript Services as well? Not so many, all right. So what is ASP.NET Core JavaScript Services? It's an extension to ASP.NET Core. You just install it as a NuGet package on top of it. And it allows you to do basically one thing. It allows you to run JavaScript code from your ASP.NET Core code. And then you can do interesting things with that. So for instance, we can run Webpack from our ASP.NET server. So we host our ASP.NET server where our .NET code is running, but we can also let it run Webpack and then get the results of that Webpack compilation into the browser, which is kind of interesting. And the other thing is you can do things like server-side rendering, which you can't do with Aurelia just yet. They're working on it, I think, to get that supported. But for some of the other frameworks, like this is not tied to Aurelia per se. You can use it with any modern web framework, like Angular, React, Vue. There's a couple of them. And they have some templates to go with that as well. And those templates make it interesting because it makes it really easy to get started. If you've ever set up Webpack yourself from scratch, good luck with you. It's not easy. You really have to understand a couple of things before you can get that working. But with ASP.NET Core JavaScript Services, you just create a new project and it just works. It's almost magic. One of the other things that makes this interesting is that we can now run and debug both our backend and frontend simultaneously because it's all inside the same server, right? So we can debug our code in the browser and then have it also connect to our backend code in ASP.NET Core, and we can just step into a call from the front end into the back end and go back again. So let me just quickly show you how easy it is to get started with ASP.NET Core JavaScript Services. I hope it's going to work. My MacBook is doing weird things. I don't know why. It has some input lag, so bear with me. All right, so for those who haven't ever done ASP.NET Core, there's this new thing which is called the command line interface to .NET Core. It's awesome. You should try it. It's basically you type .NET and it does things. So you can do a couple of things with it. You can build your code, you can run it. But there's also a templating kind of thing going on there with .NET New. So if I do a .NET New, I get a list of all the templates I have available on my machine. Now I've already installed the single page application template for ASP.NET Core, which is from the ASP.NET Core JavaScript Services thingy. So I've installed that already. You can go up to the web and see how you can install that. I won't bore you with that right now. So let's make a folder here and call it ASP.NET Core Spa, and then go .NET New Aurelia, and it will just create a new project for me with both the JavaScript code and the .NET Core code inside there, and we can go here and we can open this up in Visual Studio Code. If my mouse is working. So it should be here. This lag is really bad. Anyway. I'm doing this on ASP.NET Core on my Mac, in Visual Studio Code, sorry, on my Mac, by the way. If you haven't tried that, go try it. It's great. We use it for our front-end development right now. And then once I open this up, it asks me if I want to add some files so I can actually run this thing, so I'll do that. And then when we look over here, we get a couple of things from the template. Oh. This is really not working great. But yeah, but it's the input lag that's nagging me. So there we go. So what we see here is we have this we get this webpack config file down here at the bottom. And we also get this webpack config vendor file, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. But this is basically where you configure Webpack, and as you can see, there's quite a bunch of stuff in here already, so it's not that bad, but if you've never done this before, this can be daunting. But we also get our client app here. If my mouse is working, we have this client app folder, which contains all my JavaScript code. So there's a boot.typescript. It already does TypeScript for you, so you don't have to set that up either, so it's pretty cool. You can see all the components for my application in here, and it provisions it with a couple of things out of the box. So we have a home component here with some HTML in here, which is our template, and we have a TypeScript file here where we can write our code for this particular component. And they have templates for all the JavaScript frameworks, so they have one for Vue and Angular. And depending on what you use, you get different things here, but this is just the way Aurelia works, really. And then on the end here, we have our C# and .NET code in here. So if you've ever done .NET, this should be pretty familiar to you. Now let's just try and run this. And it's now compiling our backend code, and it's not going to work because I've got one tiny little thing, which is I didn't install the Node modules in here because we're doing Node.js as well, so I need to run npm install, and it's probably going to take some time, but what it's doing now is downloading all the Node modules, all the JavaScript dependencies basically from the web that I need to run this application. Hopefully it's not that bad because I should have everything it's going to download in my cache already. Oh, there we go. So let's try and run this again. So it's starting my ASP.NET Core server, which is, if you're familiar with .NET Core, is Kestrel, which is my development server, really. So it's starting that, and then it will pop up a browser and navigate to the home page of that web server. So there we go. And my ASP.NET of my Aurelia app is now running inside the browser, and we can see this if we go here to, if my mouse is responding, to counter. You see this is just all running in the browser, right? There's no backend CS HTML file or anything going on. This is just all running in the browser. And we can do increments and stuff like that. And it all just works. And if I go here to fetch data, this is actually calling into an API that's already created for me by the template again. So that's calling into an API in the backend in my ASP.NET Core server. So this is really easy to get started. If you've never done any modern stack JavaScript development, this is pretty cool because you don't have to worry about a lot of the details going on here. Of course, at some point you will have to deal with that anyway. God, there we go. And then my screen went black. Oh, there we go. So one of the things we set out to do is to split our code base up to those different modules. And while we were setting that up, we ran into some issues, and I'll talk about that. And so I wanted to share with you how we set that up, so if you ever wanted to do this, you can have a look at what you will face. But to really understand how we did that, we need to first understand how Webpack works. Anybody using Webpack? Quite a few people, so this should be familiar to you. What Webpack does basically is you give it an entry point, and you point that at a part of your application, and then it goes from there, and it figures out what other modules you're importing and you're using in your application, and then it will compile that basically, and it'll put that together into one big bundle file, it's called a bundle, and that bundle gets the name of the entry point you specified. This is really simple. It just puts all those files into one thing, really. And of course, you can do a lot of more stuff with Webpack, like you can include other types of files, like HTML files or less files, CSS, all that kind of stuff. And it all puts that into that same bundle. Or you can even separate things out again. But basically, what it boils down to is this. You just point it at something, and it figures out what it needs to include. Now, one of the things you can do with Webpack is you can actually go ahead and code split that. You can apply code splitting. So what you do is you specify another entry point, and then when we compile, we get two separate bundles. So we get our app.js in this case, and we get our scheduling.js, right? So because we have two entry points. Now what's interesting though is this number, those numbers here, the 0, 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 5. And that's basically the identifier of the module inside the Webpack bundle, so that when you start main.js and it needs home.js, it says, okay, I'm gonna fetch module 1 from the bundle, and then it loads that up, and then we can continue. But there's a problem with this. Once you start getting into, splitting it across repositories, so you have multiple Git repositories with individual teams working on your code. If we then compile that with code splitting in mind, this is what we get. We get 0, 1, and 2, and 0, 1, and 2. Now, when we actually run this application, it's going to be a problem, because if that scheduling main here requires weak.js, it's going to say, I'm going to need module 1, right? But what it's actually getting is this one. So we actually get the wrong module loaded. And that's a bit of a problem. Luckily, you can easily fix that with something that's called the Named Modules plugin. It's a plugin for Webpack. It's out of the box. It's included. You don't have to do anything special. You just configure it, right? And what you get is that all the bundles now have their names as their identifier, basically. So at least you don't get clashes when you load different modules in. Except, of course, if you have the same module twice with the same name, then you're still going to get into trouble. But at least it makes the bundle a little bit bigger. So our resulting JavaScript bundle file is quite big. But still, we figured that it was worth the risk of making a bundle a little bit bigger, given the benefits that this creates. Now, there's one other thing that we had to, solve, really, is that in a typical JavaScript application, you're going to use some kind of vendor library, right? So you're going to use external libraries that you haven't written yourself, and typically you're going to, use that pretty much everywhere. So, for instance, jQuery is a very popular library. You've probably all used it at some point in your careers. Maybe you're trying to move away from it. But anyway, you're going to use jQuery and you're going to use it everywhere, right? Now the problem with this is, if we're not careful, we're going to get that jQuery up in both bundles, right? So we have two bundles. We have our app.js and our scheduling.js, and they both have the jQuery module inside it, which makes it really big, because jQuery is a pretty big library. So that's a problem as well. Because we didn't really want to get into this, because then we're going to ship code to our customers and they're going to be waiting until everything downloads, right? So it takes longer for our application to start up. Fortunately, Webpack has some means to control that, and I've talked about this a little bit in the demo, is that there's this vendor configuration file. And what that does is basically you do one separate compilation for your vendor bundle. So you get a vendor.js with a vendor manifest JSON file, which basically specifies which modules are included in that vendor bundle. So we can put jQuery in there, or any other external library you might want to use. And then you configure your other bundles, so your app.js and your scheduling.js in this case, to use that vendor bundle, basically. So it goes into that manifest file and it finds, okay, this is already included there, I'm not going to include it again, right? Now, one interesting thing about this is that, there's those numbers again. So we have 1 and 3 in this case. And again, we're going to have a problem because they don't unify across those two libraries. So I can end up with different versions of jQuery because I'm using version 1 in app.js and version 2 in the other. And that's going to be a problem at runtime. So we wrote a little piece of code which is called the named delegated modules plugin. It's really simple. It's just 21 lines of code that you insert into your webpack configuration. And then it uses names for those things as well. Right, so these things are called delegated modules, which basically just point you at someplace else. And with that plugin inserted into your configuration, we actually get the same thing loaded in both cases. Right? So let me just show you what that really looks like in practice. I'm going to stop that application. So what I've done already previously, I've set up 2 modules and 1 app, which is, the app is like the bootstrapper. It just starts your application and stuff like that. So I've done 2 modules. I'm currently inside module 2. And if I run this, sorry. I've already done the npm install in this case, so I don't have to wait for that. And this is taking a bit longer than usual. Oh, there we go. And I'm gonna just go here. Now you see here is we have module 1 and module 2 on the left. I've just hard-coded these. You could probably do something like dynamic loading, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Now I'm currently running module 2, so I can't actually run module 1 right now in this application because I started the other one. We do have it set up now that we can run the main application and it just loads up those both modules, right? So I can switch it up, but I'll show that later. Now, this is my module 2. It just says hello world from module 2. I don't have all of the thing on the left, the whole navigation thingy is not inside this app. It's in another place on my disk. But it just loads that up because I've already pre-compiled that and webpacked that, and it just starts that. And then I have the other module, this module, which is ready to go and webpacked as well, and I just load that up dynamically. Now, the interesting thing here is that these modules can do their own routing. So each of the modules has their own piece of their own logical URL inside my application, and they can route from there as well. They can do deeper routing if they want. Like I'm currently at module 2/page1, and module 1 has its own URL as well. Now, if you look at the code for this, you see here that I have this module 2 home. I have module 2 here. This is my HTML template for my main entry point for this second module, which shows you that navigation bar at the top. Right, so I have this list here with only 3 items. I have a home, a page 1, and page 2. So this is only that. There's nothing else here in my code base. It's only really, if I go back to the page, it's only really the right-hand side of the screen right now, which is in my code base. So I've separated it out. If I look at the webpack config, you'll see here that I've included that named delegated modules plugin I was talking about earlier. So I've already previously set that up. It's just 21 lines of code that I've written and put up on GitHub. And I have the named modules plugin here as well, which does that naming thing for all the other types of modules, basically the default kind of stuff. And when I look at the index page here, which is my my index says HTML. This is ASP.NET Core code, but what it does here is you see those scripts. So you see a common JS, which is just a bootstrapper for Webpack, which allows you to dynamically load modules into your application while it's running. So this is what's being used by the bundles. And if I've got that vendor JS here, which includes all my external libraries. So like jQuery, Bootstrap, all that kind of stuff is in that vendor bundle. Then I have that app.js, which is my main application, which is the left-hand side of the screen we just saw. And then module2.js is my second module, which is on the right side of the screen, right? And if we go here to the browser, and we open the developer tools for a second, can you see this? Is it too far away? Just zoom in a little bit. We go into our dist folder, which is where my JavaScript code is. You see that module2.js here. And as you can see, it uses this global function, which is called webpack JSON-P, which allows you to add stuff to the runtime while it's running. And we have a couple of modules here. Some of those are external modules that I'm using, but we should also be able to find module. Typing is hard. Module 2. So there we go. This is module 2. And this is the code for module 2. Now you see all kinds of freaky stuff here, which is a lot harder than what you saw me type in Visual Studio Code just now, because this is transpiled code. This is TypeScript transpiled to JavaScript. Right? So that's already done. And this is just the main module, and then we have the template, the HTML template in here. So my HTML for my page is also inside the bundle. So it's not on some external location, it's just all in one giant big file for my application. Now, one of the cool things that we can do now is that we can actually run this. If I go and stop this. Oh, come on. Yeah. If I run this, it's going to start up my backend again. But now it's debugging. And it should also start a browser window with my front-end code. There we go. I just have to refresh because it's starting my browser earlier than my backend's actually running. If I run it now, and I go here to module 2, I go to my page. This page actually fetches data from my backend API. So I'm now debugging my TypeScript code running inside Chrome. And I could actually just, step through here. And it's actually, this is where it's calling the backend API. So if I just let this run, we should hit the breakpoint inside my backend API, which is my .NET Core code, my ASP.NET Core application, and I can just, step through here and see what's happening, what parameters I'm getting, and all that kind of stuff. So I've got my front end and back end debugging simultaneously inside one editor, which is, I think, pretty awesome if you're doing any serious web development kind of things. So I've got 10 minutes left. And then I'll have time for some questions, hopefully. Because what I haven't actually talked about is how we load up those modules at runtime. Like we separated out the modules. They have their own bundle file. And we can even split the modules again, but we don't really need that right now. But I haven't talked about how we actually load them up at runtime. So what happens at runtime? We have our browser and we have our backend server. And we get a file called config.json, which is just a file format that we specified really. And this is something, like you can hard code this, or you can use your deployment tooling to put dynamic stuff in here if you want. So in this case, we have two paths. We're going to try and find something that's called a manifest file. So that's the other one. So we're going to go to scheduling/manifest.json and see if it's there. If it's there, we're going to load it up. And then inside there, we have a main, which is the main entry point for that module. And we have a route, which is the route at which our model is going to live inside our single-page application. And then we have the bundle, which is all the files that Webpack generated, really. This is the file that we generate through Webpack, which is get written to disk and deployed with our application. And we do the same thing for the other module path that we showed here. So we have scheduling and realization, and we both load them up. And then we configure our app router. So app router is the main router in Aurelia, so that's the main entry point where your application is being configured. So what we do here is we say, okay, at /schedule and /realization, there's something. We don't know exactly what, but we navigate to a specific module in our application, which then loads up the rest of the code. So if we navigate there, so we navigate to schedule/something, it doesn't really matter. At that point, we load up the module bundle. So we load that JavaScript file, we load that CSS file, and we load that up. And then we run that scheduling main, which contains the routing for the scheduling module, really. Right? So all the routing that's in there is configured within that main function. And from there, we configure the child router, so any routes that are specific to that module can be configured here. So, in closing, where are we at right now? We have two teams currently working on two separate modules. So one is working on scheduling, the other one is working on realization. Sorry. One of the modules is pretty much done. Well, almost anyway. There's one big thing that still needs to be developed. Hopefully that's done soon as well. And the other team, they started with some work on the main application, which has some generic interface stuff that's going on. So they started there, and they've recently started on our second module, which is realization. And so far they're pretty happy with the development experience. They were pretty quick to set the basics for that. And we hope to have that ready, hopefully by the end of the year, but I'm thinking it's going to slide a bit to next year, early next year. So we haven't actually put this into production yet. We do have pieces that are in production but aren't currently being used. But overall, we're quite happy with the progress we're making. We started on this really at the beginning of this year, and we've pretty much finished that first module already. So far, we're pretty happy with that. So some resources, if you want to. Of course, there's Aurelia. If you're interested in that, you can go to aurelia.io. There's a bunch of good stuff on there to help you get started with Aurelia. If you're interested in doing Aurelia and Webpack, there's a wiki page which has a lot of useful content if you want to deep dive into how all that stuff works. I've only shown half of it. There's a lot of more stuff you can do with Webpack. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. I put a link up here to my Webpack Power Tools thingy, which is just a couple of plugins we've wrote, which just makes stuff easier. And if you're interested in ASP.NET Core JavaScript Services, there's a blog post from Microsoft on that topic as well. There's a whole, it tells you what you need to install to get started and all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, go check that out. All the stuff I've talked about is something we've been working with Aurelia. I'm fairly confident it would also work with any of the other frameworks, but we haven't actually tried that. But it's all really Webpack what we're doing, so I guess you could use it with Vue or Angular or React or any of that stuff as well. But we just chose it, we chose this, and we started with this, so yeah. So thank you all for coming. I can do some questions right now. I still have about 5 minutes, so and if you have any more questions after that, please join me at the InfoSport stand, which is down at the conference floor. And come and ask the guy. I don't know who he is. Something with Godfrey comes to mind. But so thank you all for coming.